What is going on, Bills Mafia? Kevin Siracuse back here to talk about some free agency moves for the Bills. We've been off for the last few weeks, but we would like to start a new installment of talking about the offseason moves for the Bills here. So I have Pat Bruknis producing for me. We'll bring him on at the end of this segment here because we would like to talk about 5 big moves that the Bills need to make this offseason. And, there are plenty of moves that they can make, but we'd really like to consolidate it to 5 key moves that this team needs to make to get over the hump and finally get back to the Super Bowl and finally win a Super Bowl. So this week, we're going to talk about that. Next week, we'll get into the nitty gritty, more into the weeds about how they can get back under the cap, because right now the Bills are about $10 to $15 million over the cap. So we'll take a look at some of the cap casualties, some trades that could happen, and just what the Bills can do moving forward. And then on March 3rd, or at least that first full week of March, we'll put it all together, put some contracts out there, put some terms out there, and then that'll lead us into a potential free agency segment on March 10th when it is the first day of tampering period, and then the new league year will start on that Wednesday, March 12th. So I want to start by talking about some of the coaching staff hires that have been reported. Now, the Bills haven't made these official yet, but based on what we've heard, I think these are some great hires. As let's just start with the special teams coordinator. Chris Tabor has taken over as the special teams coordinator for Matthew Smiley, who has been with the Bills organization ever since Sean McDermott was hired in 2017. So Smiley is out, Tabor is in, and he is highly regarded as one of the best special teams coordinators in the entire league. He's 53 years old. He's been coaching football for over 30 years, and 16 of those years have been at the NFL level. So I saw some interviews. I saw some clips of former players talking about what he brings, and it seems like he coaches with a lot of joy and passion, and I think that's what the Bills need. Then you go over to the defensive side. Ryan Nielsen comes over as the senior defensive assistant, and I think that he's going to directly impact that defensive line. That's going to be a point of emphasis this offseason, as we will get to with some of these key moves. And then Mike Pellegrino coming over from New England. He was with the organization for 10 years, and then he served as the cornerbacks coach for the last 6 years. And then you look at the first transaction that we saw from a player standpoint, and the Bills extended the qualifying offer to exclusive rights free agent Alec Anderson, meaning that he could no longer negotiate or sign with another team. So they got him to that 1-year deal. And I think that was the first domino to fall. I think there's going to be a lot of moves, a lot of players that could be re-signed, but I was glad to see that the Bills were extending that qualifying offer to Anderson, who essentially was 6th man of the year. The Bills used more 6 offensive linemen than any team in the NFL this season, and Anderson was the guy leading the charge on that. And he just plays with that nasty and brings that intensity that I think that this team needs. And that being said, that kind of leads into my next point about James Cook, because Anderson paved the way for Cook, enough for Cook to say that he deserves $15 million. Now, the thing that I'll say about that is I love James Cook and what he does for this offense, but not for $15 million. I think that if you can find that sweet spot in that $10 to $12 million range, because Josh Jacobs is the 5th highest paid running back right now, and he is used way more than James Cook. Cook is only out there about 50% of the time. Jacobs is a workhorse, and he's getting $12 million a year. Joe Mixon is the 6th highest paid running back, and he is making $9.9 million based on average annual value. So if you can fit Cook in right in between Jacobs and Mixon, like a 3-year, $33 million contract, I think that is a chef's kiss for both sides. I think it's fair. Maybe the Bills throw in some incentives for Cook, but if he really wants $15 million, and I think he's just saying that for negotiating tactics, I think he wants to start high, and hopefully the Bills can get him to come down. But if he's really being stubborn about it, then you say, you know what? We're just going to re-sign Ty Johnson. We're going to give the ball to Ray Davis more. Maybe we can elevate Frank Gore Jr. from the practice squad, and he can be a key piece. And this is a loaded draft class from the running back position. So I think that running backs are replaceable, but I really like what James Cook has to offer. But I don't think that this is a situation that we need to worry about. So that being said, let's get into the 5 moves that the Bills do need to make. And starting right off the top here, number 1, the Bills need to add a dominant pass rusher. So I think that whether that's Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, or Trey Hendrickson, I don't really care which one it is. Just go get one of them. But as much as I just said I don't care which one, I think I lean more towards Myles Garrett because Hendrickson is the oldest. He's about 30, 31 years old. And then when you look at Crosby's standpoint, he's the youngest, but I'm not sure if the Raiders are going to want to undergo a full rebuild. They have 73-year-old Pete Carroll signing a 3-year contract. So I think that even though they don't have a quarterback, they're probably going to try to piece it together as quickly as possible rather than just completely disassembling their roster. They have Christian Wilkins coming back from injury, so I think you'd want to pair him on that defensive line with Max Crosby. So as much as Max Crosby is saying that he wants to play for a winner, he hasn't necessarily requested a trade. I think he would love to play for the Bills. I don't know if the Raiders are going to want to part ways with him. So, Pat, if you pull up Myles Garrett's contract, let's take a look at this because I think this might be the most feasible, because the other thing with Crosby is that his base salary is over $22 million. So he is going to be the most expensive because that's the main thing that you're looking when you're acquiring these players is their base salaries. So if you look at Garrett's contract for the 2025 season, you'll see that his base salary is only about $1.3 million, but then he has that option bonus for about 18.5, and that leads to that cap hit of $19.7 million. So if you were to scroll down, you'll see that 2025 option bonus, there's $5 million due on March 14th, and then $13.5 million due on August 28th. So essentially, if the Bills were to acquire Garrett before March 14th, it's going to cost that $19.7 million. But if they wait until August 28th, I don't think they would wait that long. And if they do wait that long after August 28th, they only have to pay that base salary of 1.3. But if it's somewhere in that sweet spot of early April, like they did with the Diggs trade, leading into the draft, then it turns into $14.8 million on the salary cap. So I think maybe that could be the most feasible right there, where the Bills give it a couple of weeks into the new league year, and then they say, you know what, we're ramping up towards the draft here. We're going to give you these picks here, and we'll get into that at a separate conversation when Pat comes on. Maybe we can talk about some of that compensation. But I'll just say right now, I think that would make the most sense, and then maybe the Bills would want to rework that contract and extend him and lower that cap hit to a new deal. So that's number one right there. Number two, beef up the defensive line. So as much as we talk about adding that pass rusher, because I think Myles Garrett really is the difference between the AFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. But if the Bills did get past the Chiefs, because I think if you have Myles Garrett, that could be the difference right there. When you're looking at that 32-29 defeat, maybe it's a 35-32 victory, or I guess in this case of a defensive player, you're going to give up less points, obviously, because that would make sense, right? So as much as I think that Garrett would help get to the Super Bowl, would that be enough to win? Because Philadelphia proved they did not blitz Mahomes once, but they got home consistently. 6 sacks that they had, and it was just a 4-man front. So they really built up their defensive line through the draft and a little bit through free agency as well. But they proved, they laid out the blueprint that Mahomes can get got. The Chiefs can get beaten. As good of a team as they've been, I think you can also say that they've been pretty lucky. So if you have the right blueprint, you can get these guys. So if you're going off of number one there, and you're putting that money towards that pass rusher, whether it's Garrett, Crosby, or Hendrickson, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll say it's Myles Garrett. You're not going to have as much money naturally to pay for that defensive tackle. And I think that this draft class is also loaded with defensive tackles. So I think that you can get a true one tech who can learn under Daquan Jones's wing, and then he can take over once Daquan's contract is up and or he retires. So if you're going off of that, maybe you just get another 3 tech who can be a nice rotational piece, who can give some more power and beef up front. And I think that a sneaky good player here could be Adam Butler, who stepped up very well in Christian Wilkins' absence this season, as he had 65 tackles and 5 sacks. He started 16 games for the Raiders. And this was his second year out in Vegas, and he put up 5 sacks both seasons. He's been a very good rotational piece, and I know you got to be careful with that because the Bills have gone with those rotational pieces for years now as they've been patching it together with those veterans. But again, if you get that Myles Garrett and then you use a draft to your advantage, I think you can get by with this rotational piece in Adam Butler. And I think he might be a tick above a Jordan Phillips or a Linval Joseph, Poona Ford, Tim Settle. pick from any of those guys. So I think Adam Butler could be a very good addition. And I think another good rotational piece, someone that I've been high on for the last couple of years and the Bills have had interest, he was actually in on a visit last season around this time, was Sebastian Joseph Day. I will save more on him for when Pat comes on because I know that we also have some mutual interest with that defensive tackle. So moving to number 3, I think the Bills need to add a wide receiver who can separate, because that has been another thing that's been holding this team back, is that they haven't had that vertical presence. They haven't had that field stretcher. And something in Joe Brady's offense that really needs to come to fruition is having those vertical and horizontal field stretchers. And that's why I really liked the Curtis Samuel signing at the time, but that didn't really pan out this year. Now, he had his injuries, and then you can say, well, he was nicked up, and then the playbook, yada, yada. I don't want to make excuses, though. The fact is, we're paying him $8 million per year. You need more production. So if you're finding someone else who can be a field stretcher, I think that Hollywood Brown is a very intriguing option, because there are reports that Josh Allen wants to play with Marquise Brown, and I think the Bills have had some interest in the past. But the thing with him is that he has an $8 million market value, which is exactly the same as Curtis Samuel. So you wouldn't want to be redundant. And Marquise Brown hasn't put in a full season since 2021. That was the only season he had over 1,000 yards. So he's dealt with his injuries over his career. And I'm just not sure if you can match it up price-wise. But he was the one that really stuck out to me, because this free agent class doesn't really excite me from Joe Brady's standpoint. Sure, you have your Keenan Allens and your T. Higgins, but they don't really fit the Bills' philosophy. I want someone who is going to fit in with this offense, who's going to fit in with that everybody eats approach. He can be lined up in multiple positions, used in multiple packages and formations. I guess Darius Slayton could be another interesting option, but again, I don't know if he provides much down the field. And I'll just say for Amari Cooper right now, if you can get him back at a reasonable price, sure. I loved Amari Cooper, and I love that he's not a diva, and he just wants to win. But does he give you enough down the field? Maybe that's where you look to Mark Hollywood Brown. Number 4 here. Actually, you know what? I'll just skip ahead to number 5, because I was going to talk about re-signing key players. I just mentioned Amari Cooper. Maybe that's someone on your list. I'm looking at Matt Collins and Ty Johnson. 1 and 2, get them done. Those guys need to be in Bills uniforms next year. And then you look at other guys, Quentin Morris, Reggie Gilliam, Reed Ferguson. I think those guys are definitely options to get re-signed. And then if I could use this point to go back to number 4, Damar Hamlin, because Hamlin's market value is only $3.1 million. I think he's going to command more than that, but I like Damar as safety 3. I want Cole Bishop to be safety 2, starting opposite Taylor Rapp. So if that's the case, if you can get Damar back on a very team-friendly deal and say, you know what, we view you as safety 3, but it's going to be an open competition in training camp, and going into the season, go battle it out with Cole Bishop. I'm okay with that. And then obviously you have the draft as well. Maybe you add another free agent, but I'm not really sure if the Bills are going to want to do too much to the safety room. But as you see here with number 4, I think they need to retool it. So I think that based on that point right there, it might make more sense that they spend more resources. At least I think they might spend more in free agency on the cornerback room, because you have your 2 starters with the safeties between Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. You only have Christian Benford right now. Rasul Douglas is a free agent. He's getting up there in age. I know he's not that old, but 30, 31 years old. He's dealt with his injuries, and I think we can all agree that he took a step back this past season. So maybe that's where the Bills want to spend some more money and say, we're going to extend Christian Benford, and now let's go find him his running mate. But it's you got to be careful with how you do that, because do you really want to be spending a lot of money on 2 cornerbacks, especially if you get a Myles Garrett? So I'm going to throw a name out there that I think is very underrated, and that is Jonathan Jones, because I know he's also 31 years old, but he could be a nice, steady veteran, especially if the Bills look to build through the draft by drafting another defensive back. I think that Jonathan Jones would make a lot of sense, because Mike Pellegrino coached him for the last 6 seasons as that cornerbacks coach. So if you're trying to look into the breadcrumbs here, that could make a lot of sense, where the Bills would say, okay, he knows the system. That could be a very good mutual fit. He's played multiple positions before. He's still productive at his age. Let's get him, but then we're going to look to add to this room, whether it's via the draft or maybe another free agent signing. And I think that's a perfect time to bring Pat Bruknis on, because Pat has someone who I think is also a very good fit. But again, it's just very tricky because how much money will the Bills actually have? So that being said, Pat, we just kind of bounced around a little bit. We left off on number 4, and we can go back. But since we're talking about the cornerback room here, why don't you tell us a name that I think could be on the Bills' radar between the team and a lot of fans as well?
Yeah, no, the guy who I've been thinking of is Asante Samuel Jr. He's only 25 years old. He did have that season-ending injury last year, and he'll be a nice guy to pair with Christian Benford, who's only 24. He could be a good young duo for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, see, that's exactly what I was thinking, because you have two guys in their prime, because the Bills go for those types of players, right? They want to get players on the ascend. They don't want to be past their prime. Like Rasul Douglas, I think he was great last year because that was just a great acquisition at the trade deadline, and you kind of caught him at his peak. But now he's kind of on the descent here. And if you could get someone who's still peaking in their careers, and you have two of those guys on the outside between Christian Benford and Asante Samuel Jr., that would be awesome. But the question is, can you do it for the right price? Because will the Bills have enough money to pay 2 boundary corners and potentially Myles Garrett?
Yeah, no, right. I think SpotTrack has Asante Samuel Jr.'s market value at 11.5. So maybe the Bills could get him at 10, maybe 9.5. I think that might be pushing it. I wouldn't pay no more than 11.5.
Yeah, and if you want to pay Christian Benford top corner money, because he is a top 5 corner in the league. Yeah, he deserves it. How many resources do you want to allocate towards that room? And then flipping it back to number 1 here, adding a dominant pass rusher. I believe you're on the same page as me. We would love to see Myles Garrett in a Bills uniform. So if you get Myles Garrett, can you afford to get Asante Samuel Jr. or another corner of that caliber?
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to see the Bills try to spend in the cornerback room and trying to get a guy like Myles Garrett. Now, I've been saying it for the last 2 or 3 years that the Bills need an impact player on defense. It's something that we have not had the last, I just said 2 or 3 years. I believe if we would have had a guy like Myles Garrett in the AFC Championship game, we potentially could have won that game.
I mean, I would go as far as saying 5 years, because if you go back to the first AFC Championship game that the Bills were in, when Josh Allen first became that star quarterback, that was holding them back that year too. They just couldn't get pressure on Patrick Mahomes. And I think that the beautiful thing here is that I know a lot of people have been saying, well, maybe you just include Greg Rousseau in the trade package, because to my point about paying 2 corners, can you pay 2 defensive ends? Because Greg Rousseau is going to need a new contract as well. I would say at least for 2025, I would love to see Myles Garrett and Greg Rousseau on the same line together, because I think that'll open up so many more lanes for group. Because if you have that opposing offensive line, maybe double teaming Myles Garrett, then that will free up Greg Rousseau. That'll free up even guys like Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. And then some of these other defensive tackles that we're talking about here. I mentioned Adam Butler, but I know that you're a big Sebastian Joseph Day guy as well.
Yes, it's a guy that Brandon Beane has looked at the last several years. He came in on a visit, like you noted earlier. Maybe this is the year the Bills can finally get him into the building, get him to sign.
Now, the other thing that I'll say about Sebastian Joseph Day is I already mentioned how it was reported last year in March that he was in on a free agent visit, but Sebastian Joseph Day played alongside Von Miller and in front of Taylor Rapp when they were with the Rams during their Super Bowl run. And he has that inside-outside flexibility, so he could potentially take over for Dwan Smoot, who is a pending free agent here. So maybe you get a little bit more flexibility at a cheaper rate too, because Sebastian Joseph Day's market value is only $4.5 million. So if you could get him, let's just say 2 years, $8 million, 2 years, $10 million, somewhere in that range, I think that could be very smart spending.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Now, speaking of spending, what do you think about Hollywood Brown? Because when I'm talking about a wide receiver who can separate, if I'm looking at the free agency list, that's really the only one that pops. If you happen to have that, would you be able to pull up the free agent wide receivers on SpotTrack so we can take a look if there's maybe someone else that we're forgetting here? Because I just don't think that anyone really matches that. I guess while you look for that, I'll throw in Deebo Samuel, because it was reported last year that the Bills and Patriots were very interested in him on draft night. I want to say night 2 of the draft on Friday, but ultimately they didn't get a deal done. I saw a report today I don't know if this is factual or not, that he was 20 pounds overweight this season, and that's kind of contributed to the 49ers wanting to part ways. He's more expensive than Hollywood Brown, so I'm not sure if it makes that much sense from that standpoint. But from the standpoint of stretching the field vertically and horizontally, Deebo Samuel's a poster child for that for Joe Brady's offense.
Yes, he is. He's a guy who I think would fit well in this offense, and he would not have as heavy of a workload because we won't have him taking snaps at running back.
I will say, I thought the jet sweep was missing. I thought that would have been an interesting piece. So, I mean, hey, you have two Samuels now. If that trade were to come to fruition, you would have two Samuels to choose from, whether it's Curtis or Deebo running those jet sweeps or maybe some fakes or some screens. So I think the Bills would have some options. But as we look at the free agent wide receivers here, I mean, is there anyone that really stands out to you? Hey, Stephon Diggs? No, thank you. Higgins? No. Keenan Allen?
Too expensive.
No. Amari Cooper? Out of any of these guys, Chris Godwin, too, for that matter. Those top-tier wide receivers, I would say that re-signing Amari Cooper makes the most sense just because I don't see a fit for someone like a Chris Godwin or a Keenan Allen. As much as that would be fun to say, oh, Allen to Allen, I don't think so.
Right.
Brandon Cooks, maybe, just because of his presence on the field and his ability to stretch the field. I guess that could be an option. Deontay Johnson, he had a lot of off-field issues, so I'm not even scratching the surface there. DeAndre Hopkins, no. A little bit too old for me. Mike Williams, too reminiscent
injury
of
issues.
Well, that and Keon Coleman. So I want something more than just that big physical receiver who can block. So I guess maybe those three right there, Marquise Brown, Darius Slayton, and KJ Osborne, if we're sticking with the UB theme here, because people have been talking about, well, hey, if you can't trade for Myles Garrett, Khalil Mack's out there, or a lower tier defensive end, Malcolm Kuntz. How about a lower tier wide receiver in KJ Osborne to help stretch the field? I mean, maybe you could see a UB reunion with those guys, but none of these names are really popping out to me for wide receiver.
Yeah, these names are not really popping out to me either. You know, outside of Marquise Brown and Amari Cooper, there's nothing, you know, like you already said with Deontay Johnson, the off the field issues. We already went the route with Stephon Diggs, and he's coming off at ACL. So is Chris Godwin, I believe, as well. So yeah, not a lot of, you know, if they can't land a Marquise Brown or retain Amari Cooper, I would look more into the trade and draft.
I was going to say, I guess we have left out the draft because I don't want to act like it's only free agency or trades that you can add to the wide receiver room here, because they can just draft one who kind of fits that niche role, who has that specific spot in Joe Brady's offense. So maybe they'll just say, you know what, let's just put all of our money towards the defense for free agency. And as much as we want to put our draft capital towards defense as well, maybe save a couple of picks for a wide receiver or running back.
Definitely, I agree.
And that being said, I guess as we kind of round this out here for re-signing key players, are you on board with re-signing Mack Hollins and Ty Johnson?
Yes, 1,000%. Mack Hollins, look at the game he had in the biggest game of the season, the AFC Championship game. He was our best receiver in that game. And Ty Johnson did wonders for us. He was the best third down running back last year. Those are two guys that played pretty significant roles for us last year, and I would love to bring them back.
So if you bring back Mack Hollins, you would have him, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, and Khalil Shakir. There's really one, maybe two spots open. I guess just to kind of round this out here, what do you think is the most likely outcome, assuming that they can get Mack Hollins back on the books?
Yeah, I think the most likely outcome is they're going to draft a receiver. I don't know when, but there's a small part of me that believes that they're going to try to re-sign Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and we know that this team loves competition, so it's not like they're just going to draft one and that's it. They're not touching the room. So they're going to bring in multiple players. I guess I'm thinking about it more from like an opening day perspective. So I guess for me, the most likely outcome is that they draft a wide receiver and then they sign one in free agency, whether that's re-signing Amari Cooper, signing Hollywood Brown, or a lower tier guy like KJ Osborne. But I think when they trot out their opening day roster, they probably will only carry 5 wide receivers, and then may the best man win. It'll definitely be interesting to see how Brandon Beane handles this, because Josh Allen proved this year that he can make it work. He can put the pieces together. You don't have to have that Stephon Diggs type wide receiver. You can give him a Mack Hollins and a Ty Johnson and James Cook, and just put these different pieces together, and it will come to fruition.
Josh Allen definitely has proved that he elevates his teammates around him. So Josh Allen doesn't need the A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. He can make it work with a Matt Collins and Ty Johnson, like you just said.
So as we finish out this segment here, Pat, are there any players that I forgot or maybe we didn't mention yet? Anything else that you would like to add here as we get going here with this first installment of our offseason series here? And look forward to next week when we can talk about more of these contracts. I know people have been talking about maybe restructuring Von Miller's contract and extending someone like Josh Allen to free some more space. So before we get into that next week, is there anything that you would like to add here from anything that was mentioned tonight?
Yeah, there's Bills fans that are hard on Brandon Beane for not going out and getting the big fish in free agency. But the way I look at it is when we needed a legitimate pass rusher, Brandon Beane went out and got it in Von Miller. Now, we are in need of a legitimate pass rusher again and a true impact player. And I do believe come week 1, we will have that. And I do believe it will be Myles Garrett.
Yeah, I would agree because I think Brandon Beane knows that he needs to find that defensive piece because I think we're all in agreement here. I mean, we'll see what the comments say after we get this video uploaded here, but I feel like everyone's in agreement this season where we don't need to get into these big arguments. Oh, we need a wide receiver. No, draft this player. No, draft that.
Right.
I think everyone can say, like, if you get Myles Garrett, then that is going to make a world of difference. And then I think a lot of people are in agreement about Matt Collins, Ty Johnson, guys like that, and then just adding to the defense in general. So I feel like this is one of those years where we're all on the same page about what we need to do. Now it's just up to Brandon Beane in the front office to go out there and actually do it. And one more thing that we would like to add is that there are some viable options in the safety market. So, Pat, if we could pull those up, the free agent safeties on Spot Track here, I just want to take another moment to look at this because as much as I was saying that maybe DeMar is signed as that third safety and then they could draft one, let's take a look at some of these free agents because the Bills really could look to sign one of these guys. Now, I've been a big Andre Cisco guy before, but his market value is about $10 million. I want to say off the top of my head, so I'm not sure if that's going to make sense because you don't want him to block Taylor Rapp or even Cole Bishop for that matter, and he might look to get paid somewhere else. Marcus Epps could be interesting because I know he's coming off of a season-ending injury, but he is a good, solid veteran, and maybe that injury could be good from the standpoint of it lowers his price tag, and the Bills could get him for a good price. He was Josh Allen's teammate at Wyoming, so Josh could probably vouch for him. And maybe they'll say, you know what, you're going to start as safety 4. We're going to give you a team-friendly deal here and just prove yourself. If you can come back from this injury, it's going to be an open competition between you, DeMar, and Cole Bishop to play alongside Taylor Rapp and Cam Lewis for that matter. So I feel like that would make sense, just getting a veteran like that who knows that he's probably not going to start, but could play some valuable minutes. I think Xavier Woods makes sense. Jeremy Chin, at least from the football standpoint. But again, it just depends on what do the Bills see in that safety room because Xavier Woods, he has got a market value of $4.4 million, Jeremy Chin 6.1, and Jeremy Chin played some very good football. So if you were to get Jeremy Chin, that probably means that Cole Bishop is starting on the bench. So that's why you just have to be careful with drawing that line. So, I mean, are there any names here that you would like to talk about, Pat?
Yeah, I'm for bringing back DeMar Hamlin if it does not break the bank. I know you said earlier that his market value is at 3.1, but we think that he will get more than that. I'm more in the crowd of draft a safety and groom them to be Taylor Rapp's replacement. So that way in the next 2 or 3 years, you have Cole Bishop and then the rookie you drafted this year.
I mean, someone like a Justin Reed, that's going to take too much money. Justin Simmons is a little bit too old for my liking. Hufanga from San Francisco, I mean, he could be a nice piece, but he might want too much money. So if there's like a serviceable veteran, I think that could be the route. But I think you're right that they might look to draft another safety because I think there are some pretty good options in this draft class as well from the safety standpoint.
Yeah, it all depends on how high the Bills want to take a safety. They just took Cole Bishop in the second round, and they still have Taylor Rapp under contract for 2 more years.
Yeah, and then if you were to, I mean, we already talked about the corners, and I think we can agree that Asante Samuel Jr. would be a solid pickup, as would Jonathan Jones. I think he could be that steady veteran presence. But I mean, some other names, Carlton Davis, I would love to have him. I just think that it's going to be way too expensive. Travarius Ward, DJ Reed, same thing. And just to, tie in with my point earlier, it's just how much money do you have when you want to pay Christian Benford as well?
Right. And then you also got guys like Terrell Bernard knocking on the door pretty soon.
All right. Well, that will wrap up this first segment of the offseason series here on the Built in Buffalo Network. We thank you guys for tuning in, and make sure you tune back in next week as we will talk about some more of these players and their contracts in depth, talk about how the Bills can get back under the cap and what they can do roster gymnastics wise so that they can be cap compliant and then have enough room to spend. They can have enough money in the banana stand, as the people would say, to make some moves once the new league year starts. So until then, and as always, go Bills.
Go Bills.